Mr. Stephen Kinnock.
I'd like to start today by thanking my right honourable friend, the Shadow Secretary of State for Business, for securing this debate, and of course you, Mr. Speaker, for granting it. I'd also like to thank the Secretary of State for his statements yesterday and today, and to thank him for attending the special meeting of the APPG on steel. However, whilst I am grateful, I do regret that these meetings and statements have done very little to address the issue of investor and customer confidence, which are of paramount importance at this time. The government's priority at the moment, alongside the efforts they should be making to find and support a commercial operator, should be about securing the order book. Mr. Speaker, erosion of the customer base is the most pressing issue facing the British steel industry at this time. If the customer base goes, it will not come back. Unless the order book is secured, it doesn't matter what else happens. No one will buy a business if it has no customers. It's as simple as that. That's why I'm so deeply concerned by the Secretary of State's response to my question at the APPG yesterday, when I asked him to outline the specific actions he was taking in this regard. His answer was he'd be happy to engage with customers as and when they approached him. Mr. Speaker, this is simply not good enough. The Secretary of State should be on the phone. He should be reaching out to the CEOs of Honda, Nissan, Jaguar Land Rover and others, making it clear to them that the production of the world-class steel that they've come to expect and rely on will continue come hell or high water. Mr. Speaker, this House and every steelworker in the country now looks to the Secretary of State to take action. He should now set out precisely and in specific detail the representations that he intends to make in the coming days and weeks to the companies that comprise the customer base, which is the lifeblood of the British steel industry. I will give way.
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Gentleman makes a very important point about the supply chain and customers, and he's absolutely right to do so. And what I've said to him and said to others, we are engaging with many of them, both here and also I know the Secretary of State for Wales is. But hopefully he understands that a lot of this is commercially sensitive. A lot of those suppliers would not like us to discuss who we're talking to, what their concerns are, and I hope he understands that there's a lot of information it would be quite improper for us to divulge.
Absolutely right.
I fear the Secretary of State's misunderstood. I am simply saying that I think it's very important to be on the telephone to the customer base. And I think that the people on this bench and the steelworkers of this country would like a little bit more detail, because at the present time, forgive us for our scepticism about the possibility that there may be a lack of action here. The Secretary of State also talked yesterday about co-investment. Whilst I welcome the fact that he's belatedly apparently converted to the fact that the government and industry can actually work together in partnership, I'm not entirely sure what co-investment means in his terms. I agree with the Secretary of State that nationalisation is not a long-term solution. But what customers need to know is that come what may, they will be able to purchase strip products from the Tata sites. Such security can only be offered if the government commits to keep all options on the table. Can the Secretary of State make such an assurance to the House? Mr. Speaker, the men and women working in steel and connected industries across this country are amongst the most highly skilled and effective people in Britain. And the Port Talbot workforce is already turning the business around, with improved productivity leading to tangible improvements in business and financial performance. Their skill and dedication is matched by that of Roy Rickus, the General Secretary of Community, who even the Secretary of State managed to praise yesterday. But the surprise announcement we really needed yesterday was not that of a Conservative praising a trade union leader, but that of the government announcing an end to its laissez-faire attitude. What we needed from the government was a list of all the discussions they've had with the customer base. What we got was yet more prevarication and procrastination. What we needed from the government was the announcement that all options were on the table. What we got was ambiguity. What we needed from the government was the announcement that they would put down their pom-poms and give up their role as China's chief cheerleader in Europe. That they would end their championing of market economy status for China and end their campaign against trade defence reform. But what we got was more of the same. Yesterday, the Secretary of State only confirmed what we already knew, that the government's approach has been characterised by a dangerous combination of indifference, incompetence and rolling out the red carpet for Beijing. And this is why I will give way to my friend.
I'm grateful to Honourable Friend for giving way. Was he surprised as I was to hear the Chancellor going to China and inviting them to take part in the HS2 project and to bid for the steel, so that we're going to have Chinese steel in one of our major infrastructure projects?
I wasn't surprised, and what I would remind the House of is that 80% of the Chinese steel sector is state-owned. So on what planet can that be considered as a market economy? I leave that to the House to decide. What the SOS's claims to have been working on these things for months simply do not stack up. Yesterday, both in this House and in the APBG, the Secretary of State claimed to have been aware of Tata's decision to sell before it was publicly announced. If that was the case, if the Secretary of State really knew what was coming, then why on earth was he on the other side of the world when the board meeting was taking place? Why was he caught so unaware? If the Secretary of State really was as in the know as he claims to have been, then why did he have to rush back to the UK in a mad panic? The Secretary of State also boasted yesterday that it was his actions and his actions alone that prevented Tata from closing rather than selling Port Talbot and the rest of the strip products division. Mr. Speaker, I must admit that my jaw hit the floor when I heard that claim. I was out in Mumbai. I was there for the board meeting with Roy Rickus and Community. The Secretary of State wasn't. Tata have expressed deep disappointment and frustration with the lack of support that they've received from this government. Delayed action on energy compensation, with many companies still waiting to receive their money. Weasel words on procurement from a government who got the steel for the latest set of MOD frigates from Sweden. And above all, Tata saw a government that refused to support the steel sector in tackling Chinese dumping by opposing trade defence reforms whilst championing market economy status for China. Therefore, this supposedly pro-business government's influence on Tata is actually very limited. What really made the difference was Community Union's high-profile Save Our Steel campaign and the fact that Labour MPs have raised the issue of steel on over 200 separate occasions since the general election. Mr. Speaker, the clock is ticking. Tata have said they will give this sale all due time. Well, yesterday's news about Scunthorpe took almost 9 months to come, and it's still not fully complete. The deal on Port Talbot and the rest of Tata's strip operations may also take time. Mr. Speaker, let us therefore hope that today's debate will mark a step change in attitude and action from this government. Let us hope that they will proactively work to protect the entirety of the order book, that they will save the future of the heavy end in Port Talbot, that they will define what they mean. I will give way.
I'm very grateful to him for giving way. As he is aware, his colleagues in the Welsh Government, of course, have spent £80 million on a conference centre in Newport, £58 million on the airport in Cardiff. Does he think that the £60 million allocated to Tata in Port Talbot is sufficient?
I think what we have is a stark contrast between the actions of the Welsh Government and the actions of the UK Government. 60 million on the table. The Welsh Assembly recalled when that should have clearly been happening here. So the contrast is clear. Let us hope that they will develop and execute, Mr. Speaker, a proper industrial strategy so that we on these benches do not have to raise this matter a further 200 times in the weeks and months to come. Let us hope that they will stand up for steel.
Richard.